Royal wives weren't just elegant figures in silk gowns, waiting passively for their husband's return from battle. They were cunning political operators, willing to use the deadliest weapon available to medieval women, poison, to eliminate inconvenient husbands who stood between them and power. Behind the surface understanding of devoted wives, dutifully standing beside their kings, was something full of dark, surprising and twisted elements, where royal bedchambers became deadly laboratories and every shared meal could be someone's last. These women lived in an era when marriage was purely political, and a husband's death could mean freedom, fortune, and unprecedented power for a clever queen. Starting with the most documented and terrifying case, Agrippina the Younger didn't just marry Emperor Claudius for love, but for power, and when he threatened to change his succession plans, she turned to Rome's most notorious professional poisoner. Picture this. The year is 54 AD, and the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire is pacing the marble floors of her private chambers, while her husband lies dying from what everyone believes is food poisoning. Agrippina had married her uncle Claudius in 49 AD, after convincing the Roman Senate to change the law that prohibited such unions, bringing her son Nero from her previous marriage into the imperial household, where he could be positioned as the next emperor. The empress turned to Locusta, a Gallic woman already imprisoned for poisoning charges, who became the family's personal assassin, providing deadly concoctions that could eliminate political obstacles. According to historians Tacitus and Suetonius, Locusta prepared a poison using Atropa belladonna that Agrippina had sprinkled on Claudius's favorite mushrooms. The emperor's food taster Halotus was reportedly bribed to serve the deadly dish, but when the poison worked too slowly for Agrippina's liking, the imperial doctor Gaius Statinius Xenophon finished the job by pushing a poisoned feather down Claudius's throat while pretending to induce vomiting. Within hours, Claudius was dead, and 16-year-old Nero was proclaimed emperor with his mother as his chief advisor. But Agrippina's poisoning spree was just beginning, because when Nero felt threatened by his younger stepbrother Britannicus, he again turned to the family's favorite poisoner. In 55 AD, Nero commanded Locusta to create a poison to eliminate Claudius's biological son Britannicus, who posed a legitimate threat to his rule. The challenge was enormous because Britannicus used a food taster, so any obvious poison would be detected immediately. The solution was diabolic in its cleverness. Since the food taster would sample hot food and drink, the poison was added not to Britannicus's wine, but to the cold water he used to cool his heated cup after it had been tasted and approved. During a dinner party, as dozens of guests watched in horror, Britannicus began convulsing and fell to the ground, while Nero calmly claimed it was merely an epileptic seizure and ordered no one to intervene. The young prince died within minutes, as his stepbrother watched with satisfaction, and Nero was so pleased with Locusta's work that he pardoned her, gifted her a large estate with servants, and sent her students to train in the deadly arts. The Roman Empire had created history's first professional poisoning school, where wealthy clients could learn to eliminate their enemies with untraceable toxins. Moving to medieval Italy, where poison became a family business, Julia Tofana turned helping desperate wives into a 50-year empire that claimed over 600 lives across Renaissance Europe. In 1600s, Rome marriages were arranged for political and financial gain, with women having absolutely no say in their choice of husband, creating a market for Julia's deadly services among wives trapped in abusive or unwanted unions. Julia inherited her knowledge from her mother, Thofania d'Adamo, who had been executed in 1633 for poisoning activities, but Julia perfected the family recipe into something far more sinister. Her signature poison, aqua tofana, contained arsenic, belladonna, and lead mixed in specific proportions that created a clear, odorless, and virtually undetectable liquid that killed slowly over several doses. The genius of Julia's operation was its distribution network. She disguised the deadly mixture in cosmetic containers and religious items that could pass through any household without suspicion, selling them to desperate women who had been beaten, raped, or financially ruined by their husbands. 4 to 6 drops mixed into food or drink would cause symptoms that mimicked common illnesses like fever, weakness, and eventually organ failure, making detection nearly impossible for 17th century physicians. For 50 years, Julia operated her network across Italy with complete impunity, building a reputation so fearsome that wives would travel hundreds of miles to obtain her services. The business only collapsed when one client lost her nerve after dosing her husband's soup, begging him not to eat it and confessing everything when he demanded an explanation. Under torture, Julia finally admitted to helping wives poison their husbands and was executed in 1659, but not before creating a template that poisoning networks would follow for centuries. Yet even documented poison cases pale beside the hysteria that swept through 17th century France when Catherine de' Medici became the scapegoat for every suspicious death in the royal court. Born into the infamous Medici banking family of Florence in 1519, Catherine brought Italian sophistication to France when she married Henry II, but she also brought the reputation of a family already associated with political assassination and mysterious deaths. The French court viewed Italians as natural masters of poison and witchcraft, so when Catherine began to accumulate political power, every unexpected death became evidence of her sinister influence. The most persistent legend claimed that Catherine had perfected the art of poisoned gloves, sending scented leather accessories laced with deadly toxins to her enemies as fashionable gifts. When Jeanne d'Albret, the Protestant Queen of Navarre and Catherine's political rival, died suddenly in 1572, rumors immediately circulated that Catherine had murdered her with a pair of perfumed gloves containing slow-acting poison. But here's the shocking truth. Modern historians have completely debunked the poisoned gloves story, determining that Jeanne d'Albret almost certainly died of tuberculosis rather than assassination. Catherine's reputation as a poisoner was so deeply embedded in the popular imagination that any convenient death was automatically attributed to her machinations, regardless of actual evidence. Catherine's real crimes were political rather than toxicological, ordering assassinations and supporting the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre that killed thousands of Protestant Huguenots in 1572. Yet it was the poison legend that captured public fascination, creating a mythology where Catherine became the archetypal evil queen mother who eliminated rivals with deadly cosmetics and magical potions. Even more shocking than documented poisoners were the queens who faced false accusations that destroyed their reputations for centuries. Livia Drusilla, wife of Rome's first emperor Augustus, became the poster child for evil stepmothers, despite historians finding no credible evidence she ever poisoned anyone. For over 50 years, Livia served as Augustus's closest advisor and most trusted confidant, helping transform Rome from a republic into an empire while managing the complex succession politics that determined who would inherit ultimate power. When Augustus died in 14 AD, at the remarkable age of 77, rumors immediately began circulating that Livia had poisoned him to secure the throne for her son Tiberius. The most famous accusation claimed that Livia had smeared poison on unpicked figs in Augustus's private garden to avoid detection by the kitchen staff. Ancient historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio recorded these allegations, but modern scholars dismiss them as malicious propaganda. Think about the logistics. What poison could be painted on figs without Augustus tasting something wrong? And how could a 70-something woman climb around fruit trees, painting hundreds of figs on the chance her husband might pick one? Livia's reputation as a serial killer stemmed from the convenient deaths of Augustus's potential heirs over decades. Yet these can be easily explained by the high mortality rates of the ancient world, especially among young men engaged in military campaigns. The stereotype of the poisoning stepmother was so powerful that historians continued repeating unfounded accusations for nearly 2,000 years. Marie de' Medici, Queen of France, and another member of the infamous Medici family, found herself caught between devastating personal betrayals and desperate political maneuvering that led to the most scandalous poisoning investigation in French history. Marie arrived in France in 1600 as the second wife of King Henry IV, bringing an enormous dowry that helped solve the kingdom's financial crisis, but also bringing the cursed reputation of the Medici name. Henry IV was brutally honest about why he married her, openly stating he needed her money more than her affection. When Henry IV was assassinated by a religious fanatic in 1610, exactly one day after Marie's coronation as Queen of France, the timing seemed suspiciously convenient. Whispers immediately began that Marie had orchestrated her husband's death using Medici family poison techniques, especially since her Italian advisor, Concino Concini, was mysteriously present during the assassination but failed to intervene. Marie's behavior after becoming regent only fueled the suspicions as she immediately reversed Henry's religious tolerance policies, exiled his mistresses, and filled the government with Italian advisors. The poison allegations reached their climax during the affair of the poisons that erupted in the 1670s, when investigators traced the poisoning culture back to the Italian influences Marie had brought to the French court. Yet Marie was probably innocent of poisoning her husband, but her political incompetence and foreign favoritism created exactly the conditions that made poison accusations believable. The most heartbreaking case involves Lucrezia Borgia, who represents the ultimate example of a woman destroyed by poison rumors, despite being more likely a victim than a perpetrator. Born in 1480 as the illegitimate daughter of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, who would become Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia was used as a political pawn from childhood, married off multiple times to advance her family's schemes for power across Renaissance Italy. The poison legend claims that Lucrezia wore a special ring containing a hidden compartment filled with deadly powder that she could secretly sprinkle into enemies' food and drink during social gatherings. But examining the actual evidence reveals a completely different picture. When Lucrezia's second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was brutally murdered in 1500, stabbed multiple times, and later strangled in his bed while recovering, she was devastated with grief and had to be physically restrained from throwing herself on his body. Cesare Borgia almost certainly ordered Alfonso's assassination because shifting political alliances made the marriage inconvenient, but Lucrezia was clearly not involved in planning her beloved husband's death. Modern historians have found absolutely no credible evidence that Lucrezia personally poisoned anyone, but they have found extensive documentation of her genuine grief when loved ones died, and her efforts to protect her children from family political schemes. Royal wives who turned to poison occurred because marriage in medieval and Renaissance Europe was essentially legalized slavery for women who had no other means of escape from abusive or politically dangerous situations. Royal marriages were business transactions designed to transfer property, create military alliances, and produce legitimate heirs while completely ignoring the personal desires or safety of the women involved. These women understood that in a world where divorce was impossible, inheritance laws favored male relatives, and domestic violence was considered a husband's right, poison offered the only path to freedom, financial security, and political power that society would never grant them voluntarily. Whether they actually used deadly substances or simply faced accusations based on circumstantial evidence, these queens represent the desperate measures that intelligent women took when faced with impossible circumstances. Their true legacy was not in what appeared on the surface as elegant queens managing royal households, but in the lasting impact of women who refused to accept powerlessness and found ways to survive in deadly political waters, where every meal could be your last and every alliance could shift overnight.